Hello and welcome to Gabbitt Media. I'm Abbitt, and today we're texture painting the fantasy castle on the floating island. I'll go through a few tips and tricks. Much of this will be time-lapsed, but I'll stop and pause for any details that I think are important. This video is sponsored by Sketchfab, which is a great place to buy and sell and view 3D models online. I've used it for a few years now to sell models, and what's really fantastic is that you can view the faces and topology of the model before you buy, so you know exactly what you're getting. You can create an excellent portfolio on there, so you can show off your work to its fullest. Links in the description. I'll complete this tutorial by showing you how you can place your models on Sketchfab at the end of the modeling process. Make sure you've looked at the previous episodes to know how to set up for texture painting, and make sure you've checked out the playlists on my channel for other free courses. So here's where we got to last time. I'm in the UV editing workspace, and when I click on an object, you can see that it's got a material set up here, which we did last time. So these have all got the castle material, and these ones have all got the roof and bricks material. So whatever I have selected, let's start with the castle. If I go across the texture paint now, I should be able to start painting. So if I choose a vivid color, I can paint on this, and it will obviously appear over here as well. I'll undo that stroke. Now, in order to move between these quickly, rather than having to go to object mode, switch to the next one, back to texture paint mode. If we come up to edit and then lock object modes and untick that, I can now alt left click on the different objects. It does help if you've labeled them correctly. Otherwise you'll get this menu here, and that shows if you're clicking on something that has several things on top of each other. But if I click at the top here of the roof, it will select the roof. It will go to the mode that it was previously in. So if I change this to texture paint mode now, and if I alt left click on the main castle and change that to texture paint mode, when I alt left click back to the roof, it's in texture paint mode, and alt left click back to the castle, again it's in texture paint mode, and I can start painting. A quick note on the brush types. So if I select this material with S to sample, and the material will come in here, and it should be the same as this one here. Very slightly different when you're selecting the viewport because of the light information. S is to sample when you move over an object, and S and left click will add it to your palette. And that doesn't actually change your color here. So if I S and left click on the grass, for example, it adds it to my palette, but it doesn't change my actual brush. So to start off with, I'm just going to add in my own type of ambient occlusion. Now it's probably a good idea to actually turn ambient occlusion off at the moment, so you can see it there under the render tab. That way I won't get confused about what I've painted and what I haven't. So back to the workspace settings, and with the main color chosen, I can bring the value down, and I might even try a bit of experimentation and bring it over to some cool colors over here. Bring my strength right down, and then start painting in the shadow areas. Other alternatives are using the multiply brush. So if I sample on this color again, by pressing S, I can just bring the tone down and draw in some shade around these areas. The multiply brush does accumulate, so if I keep painting, it will go darker and darker and darker until it gets to roughly black. So you might prefer to use the mix brush with a darker color so you don't go too far with your shading. What you might find as well, especially with cylindrical objects like this, is that when we paint on the side here, we get a line because it doesn't go around the corner, and you can smear that in with your smear brush and then go back to your main brush to paint in the shadows. So I'm going to be doing a lot of experimentation with colors and having a bit of fun. I suggest you do the same. In shadows you tend to have sort of cooler colors over here, and then you've got your warmer colors in this side here, so they can be your highlights. And for some details, I would draw those in, so I'd choose a very dark version of this color, make it nice and small, zoom in and draw in some bricks, a bit more strength with my brush. But I wouldn't draw these all the way through. I would just add them in places up and down. Obviously I'll give these bricks a bit of a closer color to these ones. But again, experiment, have some fun, choose some strange different colors, draw the bricks all the way up if you want, and use this as a chance to really learn about color. You may notice areas that you need to tidy up, such as in here. So if I go back to layout, come out of isolation mode, and I probably need to change the top shape here and just bring these vertices in. So each time I'm just pressing G then Shift Z so it doesn't move in the Z axis. You have to be a bit careful because we've already unwrapped the object, so big changes will stretch the UVs. You can see that you must be careful if you do a big shape like this around the corners. So I'll undo that. Just be a bit more careful than I was there. You can use the smudge brush, of course, but it's far better to get it right without using the smudge brush. So now that I've got a base coat with a variety of colours, I can start really working on these bricks. So a nice light colour on the top of the bricks. And a cool dark colour on the bottom. And that should give them a sort of 3D feel that they're sticking out. And of course we have these ones to help us actually change the geometry. You don't necessarily need these ones, they're more for the low poly look, but it adds a bit of variation and fun. So I want to change the colour of the bricks now, so Alt left click. I might want to use the fill brush to start with. Into texture mode, cross to the fill brush, sample this colour, and then see about maybe adding some variation. I was wondering why it wasn't changing, but the strength was down very low. Oh, and we're on value as well. Forgotten to change all these things back. There we go. So I'm going to go around selecting each of these, changing them across to texture paint mode and filling them with a slightly different colour. I'll add them to the colour palette each time and see what sort of variation we can get and have some experimenting fun. At this point I think it'd be a good idea to texture some of the other objects and make sure they're sort of marrying up. I'm not entirely happy with the way the textures are linking up at the moment, so I may need to adapt my colour palette. It's a good idea to do this fairly early on in your texture painting, so that when you're painting the details you're not worried about the colours. So at this point I noticed that some of my UVs are overlapping, and what's happened is I've got the wrong texture for these bricks and windows. I can just change them. I'll just make sure they're selected, going into object mode and changing this to roof and bricks. Now when I go to texture paint mode and fill it in, it won't be affecting any of the other shape. I'll just go around making sure that they're all linked up correctly. This can probably be a bit confusing, and if you are confused it's best to just have everything onto one map and make sure it goes into different locations. So there's a few areas I need to just smudge out now. It's not too bad, but it was a bit of a silly mistake to make. I'm choosing to use the smudge because it actually adds a bit of texture to the painting, but in this case I could just fill them with the colours around it. Okay, so time for a bit more detail. Let's work a little bit on the roof. So a dark blue brush on mix mode, as if I'm sketching out the roof tiles. I like to have my objects separate because you can see when I'm painting here, I'm not painting on this one below it. If they're all joined together, it's quite difficult to try and isolate different objects or areas of your object. You'll probably notice I'm being fairly rough with this, but if it's viewed from about this sort of distance, then there's no need to go into really fine detail. Now, you don't need to paint in every roof tile, it's sort of stylized, so have bits that are sticking out. I'm also using the same blue colour to paint in the underside, so it's in the shadow. So there's a really base level of detail there. Just to give the idea of some roof tiles, you can go a stage further and add lighter sections as if the roof tiles are catching the light. So if I choose the base colour with S, bring it up a touch, maybe make it a tiny bit warmer, maybe a tiny bit further than that as well, and then give it a highlight across here like this. You have to be a bit careful when you're painting the edge like that, because you can really stretch your brush across the other side there, so do watch out for that. It might be best to do it from the top like this, and then from the underside like that. Better line. Now, generally speaking, I smudge these areas out, but you can always sample the area next to it, so S to sample, and then paint over with that. Put the brush to a higher strength. And that's kind of a way of rubbing out. Choose the colour next to it, and then paint in with that. I'll come back to these later on, but I'm just getting in some basic shapes for now. Okay, so I'll do a similar thing with the other roofs. So we're getting a bit more colour variation now. Now the individual turrets. You might find you get a slight line down the middle here. You have to watch out for that. It's best to isolate your model, and then you'll be able to fill it in. When you go back, you'll see a much thicker line. I'll click on the other one, isolate that, so it's / on my numpad, and then I can click a line, then I can draw a line down there. And now we can see more shading between the two. Bit too much now, I think. So on my main castle here, I can press S to sample this colour, and then pull it back a bit in terms of the levels. Now what I'm noticing is, because my castle base is actually quite a light colour, if I sample that now, you can see it's quite bright, and really I should have made it a bit darker so I can actually bring the highlights out a bit more. So I can change that. Let's click on the main castle, Alt left click. I'll come to my fill brush, and I'll just put the multiply on, put a really low strength of 0.1, and I'll give it this sort of browny colour. One tap, yeah, 2 taps I think. 2 taps is the colour choice for today. Maybe 3. I can always brighten up the other areas, you see. Maybe 2. Okay, so Alt left click on the other ones, tap them twice, and I've got the same contrast. Now when I paint the top of my rocks, they'll have a bit more contrast, they can go a bit brighter, and they'll stand out a bit more. Let's try that out. Oh, I've got the fill brush on again, so undo those changes. and you can see them standing out more now. See these standing out quite well in places. Obviously our bricks need a bit of texturing as well, and the underneath, but we'll get there. So next, working on these individual bricks. I know they're all planes, so I can Alt click and select the planes, and I'll sample the colour and produce a nice highlight for it. In fact, these are quite bright, so I'll bring these down with the fill brush, set to multiply, choose the colour, and just tap it a couple of times. Now I'll get ready with my highlight. I'll do an alternative this time, and I'll use the screen brush to lighten it. Now if you get this sort of problem and it's painting on the wrong side, then you need to come up and check the face direction, and you can see that all these are facing the wrong way, and we need to reverse those. Anything with a red colour is facing the wrong way. So let's go back into layout mode for this so I can see what's going on a bit more, and just select all these which might have problems. Into edit mode with them, let's just check the face orientation again. So Shift N will reverse the normals. These windows are fine because they're flat planes anyway. Okay, so I'll turn off face orientation, go back to texture paint mode, turn it off here as well, and Alt left click, texture paint, and see how that screen's going to work. Control Tab will take you to the Pie menu, and you can quickly change the texture paint mode there. I'm just highlighting and giving a touch of variation to these rocks here. Now switch across to the multiply. Choose the darker colour and just do some shading. So obviously the shading's going underneath where the light isn't coming from, and then putting a screen on the top. So it just adds a bit of shading to your model. Try and shade the areas where objects are touching as well. That's sort of natural ambient occlusion. We can also add that in afterwards, but it's nice if you can paint it in as well. Now I'm just adding a highlight to areas where I think the sun will hit hardest. It's a little bit strong here, and I do tone it down a bit later. But just grab the screen brush or a light brush colour and paint it on. And I'm just sampling the colours next to the screen brush that I added there and mixing them in and blending them in. Now I'm imagining the sun's coming from a slight angle and painting a bit of multiply with a strong yellow colour to give it a bit of vibrance in the shadows. I could have gone for a bluish colour, but I thought a bit of yellow will add a bit of sort of depth to the shadows as well. Also adding some highlights to the other roofs as well, so it breaks them up a bit, and areas where the lights kind of catch. Some of the windows I thought they needed a bit more toning up and sort of variety to them. So I went in with the multiply and screen brushes, but with different colours this time to add different textures to the light and the stonework. The same with all the other stones. Obviously the multiply and screen brush are influenced in the colours that are already there and giving them that sort of yellow glow to them because I've put the multiply onto a colour. So it just adapts the colour that's already there. So you can't just do it on plain white, for example. With the wood texture, it's fairly straightforward, just painting in some strips, light and dark. I didn't go too far with this because I'm trying to keep everything fairly basic, even though it does take a bit of time. For the most part, I've sped this up to 800%, I think, for the fastest bits. Generally speaking, it's around 600 and some bits are around 300. I just thought the base needed a bit of matching up, so I've sampled some of the colours from the castle and then painted them onto the base so the stone kind of matches up a bit. And a little bit of a blue shadow in there as well, and tiny bits of blue highlights. I thought the grass then stood out a bit too much, so I thought I'd try and blend that in a bit more, maybe add a bit more variation to it, and just sort of brush in different directions, trying things out to see how I get on. I really wanted to highlight the edge of the grass as well, and I was sort of seeing what it would look like with and without there. And of course that sort of ambient occlusion and shadow that the castle is giving off as well. So there we have the end result for the castle. It's probably a little bit dark and oversaturated in places, very slightly. I could go in and tidy those up, but hopefully you get the idea from what I've been doing and showing you here. Now in the next episodes, it's really up to you if you want me to go further. I might possibly just do a time lapse of putting a few things in just to finish it off. But if there's anything you particularly want to see, then let me know. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.